There's so much that changes when you become a mother in that instant, and then it sets in even more. And I think you start to notice maybe some ambition shifts and identity shifts into motherhood. And you start to question things, maybe like, what are you actually passionate about? Or is this job and career worth it to me anymore? Do I want to leave my baby? And that was certainly the experience for me. It wasn't like an immediate, I must quit my job. It was just little thoughts every now and then of like, this career that I once was extremely passionate about, I don't know anymore.
Welcome to the Motherhood Clinic, a podcast about caring for mothers after childbirth, led by clinical experience and real-life stories. If you're a new mom and ever asked yourself, is what I'm going through normal? Should I be worried? Or who should I ask for help? This podcast is for you. It's for anyone navigating those early weeks, months, or even years after having a baby. Each episode brings together voices from across the motherhood journey, from clinicians, experts, and mothers from all walks of life. We're here to help you feel more empowered in your unique motherhood journey. We believe in a better start to motherhood.
Welcome to the Motherhood Clinic, Alexa. Thank you so much for joining us. A bit of context for our listeners listening in. You are the co-founder at Executive Mums, and you help people that are returning from maternity leave. You've got a great resume, so I'll do the quick version, but I'll let you talk a bit more about what you've done and why we're talking today. But Alexa, you founded Executive Mums. You've also written for Motherhood magazine. I see features on Business Insider, CBS, Forbes, Newsweek. So I think that's enough of hopefully a credentials list for people listening in as to why they should be hearing from you. You also have the Reentry Room, where you talk your own podcasts around, key themes around what people need to think about as they're returning after maternity leave. But today's conversation will be two parts. We'll talk a bit about going from 0 to 1 kids and what that's like for mothers coming back to work. And then 1 to 2, because they're quite different dynamics. But let me pause there. Alexa, I'd love for you to give people an overview of what you've done and why we're talking today and why they should be listening to us over the next 30 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'm excited to be here. And, everything that I'm building is based on my own experiences of things I didn't have, right? So I'm a mom of 2 toddlers and worked in corporate America for over a decade in high-performing leadership and advertising. And when I came back from work after both of my maternity leaves, which in the US was about 3 months long, there was no transition plan, there was no conversation, there was no prep beforehand, there was no support from my managers. It was just the assumption I'd be back at work at 100% on day 1 and good to go after that. And so I had a very hard time, especially after my second baby, going back to work and managing that transition alone. And I started talking with other moms and realizing this is very common to struggle. And I wanted to build a different reality. I thought that's not fair that we are all experiencing a common struggle and no one's doing anything, or there isn't enough people doing something about it. And so I started my business, Executive Moms, and that's what we do. We do corporate workshops that train managers and HR on how to support moms returning from maternity leave. I do one-on-one coaching for moms, expecting moms, and new moms on navigating that maternity leave and transition back to work. In everything from how your ambition changes to identity and confidence resets to actual practicing how to have a hard conversation with your manager, especially when you're newly postpartum. So it was kind of sparked by this real struggle that so many mothers go through, unfortunately.
Yeah, and fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And it's pretty amazing that in this day and age that this is still a relatively new area that is becoming more popularized, coming more into public consciousness, right?
It is. It's so crazy when we hear how many women struggle, and it's so common. And it's like, this is 50% of the workforce. And so many of us are struggling. How is it just now becoming something we're working on?
Yes. And there is that, and we'll go into this, there's that duality because it is a personal and unique and individual journey that you go through as a mother. but
Uh-huh.
obviously it is a shared journey that many mothers will go through. And
Yep.
so it's bringing that duality of individual versus commonplace and bringing that. So today we want to talk about the journey from 0 to 1, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about 1 to 2, and we'll talk about the before, during, and after type journey, and share a bit about, what was your personal journey going through that, and what are the tips, advice, or ways of thinking that you share with your clients, and what you would guide people through. So let's start through and talk a bit and share your journey, what that was like before, during, and after, and start from there.
Yeah. So, okay. I love talking about my birth stories. I feel like I can talk about them all the time. But with my first, I worked all the way up until I was due. Literally was still working in labor because I was expecting to go into labor at like 41 weeks or 42. You always hear, oh, with your first, you're going to be laid past the 40 weeks and it's normal. And so that's what I expected. And so I had built in this extra time at work, like, oh, I'll get to my like handoff transition plan next week and next week. And then I went into spontaneous labor at 39 weeks. And so I was
Wow.
frantically messaging, emailing my boss and HR and my team, putting together a Google Doc while I was bouncing on a yoga ball in active labor, in
Oh my
between
God.
contractions, just
Oh
like,
my,
hey guys, here's where I'm at with project A and project B, and here's what you need to do. If X, then do Y. If Y, then do Z. And here's all the next steps. And texting HR, like, I'm in labor, gotta go. So no plan, no handoff transition time. And then my husband was like, all right, time to go to the hospital. So
yeah.
it was just very chaotic. And along with that, there was no conversation of, hey, I would like, monthly updates or a weekly update. Or when I go back to work, it'd be great if I could go back at, half time or, take back over half of my work for the first month and then transition plan, whatever. There was no conversation. And when I got back to work, my boss didn't say anything. It was just this unspoken assumption of being back at 100%. And so it was a really big struggle for me. And I had planned my birth and I planned and researched my pregnancy. I did everything right. I trained my husband how to be my doula. I had a whole birth
Oh,
plan and
yeah.
template and everything. And then, as far as maternity leave, it was nothing. It's like nobody even talked about it. The thought never even crossed my mind that it was
Mm.
something that I could actually plan for and should plan for as well.
Yeah, it's it mimics a lot of what we did as well as our family as well, where we were so meticulous about planning the birth, and we knew exactly what we wanted, had the whale music and the lights, etc. And then
Yeah.
but and then after, why does that happen? Why does everyone fall into this trap that they
Yeah.
plan for the birth, and that's part of the reason that we exist as a motherhood clinic is no
Mhm.
one plans for that after. No one forgets. They see it as the finish line, but then it's like, actually, that's the start line. And why do
Yeah.
why do we all do that?
Uh, I feel like it's a combination of, one, there's not enough awareness. We don't have enough moms talking about it. And so it's not getting enough visibility. And then two, I think it's a lot of like, you don't know what you don't know. Like I knew to expect or postpartum depression because my mom had it and she had talked about it, but I had never heard of postpartum anxiety or postpartum rage. And so when I got
Mm,
those instead, I was like, no idea what's going on with me. And I had never heard of it. No one in my circle had ever talked about it either. And my midwife didn't really have resources about it. I didn't know to Google, like, why am I feeling ragefully anxious all the time? And so I think it's a lot of, especially for first time moms, you don't know what you don't know.
hmm
And so the more resources and information that we can get to everyone who's going to reach that expecting mom in that life cycle, from midwife or OB to doula to the husband who can provide those supporting resources as well, to any sort of postpartum support, it needs to be more of like a 360 integrated holistic approach, and then just more talking about it, just
yes.
more conversational topics about how we all actually experience motherhood, which is very similar, although unique, but so much of it we all share in common.
Yes. No, I was saying, you're right. It is that normalizing of the conversation, and it's a real tricky one because the challenge is preparing for something that you don't realize you have to prepare for. Right? It's a
Mhm.
bit like it's the same challenge, not that it's the same analogy, but like people telling people to save for the future for their pensions
Yeah.
or insurance. Like he's like, I'll deal with that when that happens. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
ourselves personally, it was like all I care about with the first is I have a healthy baby, and that's a very noble and valid goal, right?
Mhm.
And that's all that consumes you because, there are people that have fertility struggles and there's, people that have miscarriages and there's all the things that, particularly as my wife's an OBGYN, like she knew all the problems that can occur. So all we care
Mhm.
about is getting to that day dot. But then afterwards, you're just like, I'll figure that out because everyone else does,
Yeah.
surely, right? And then you realize, oh, holy F, like, I haven't prepared for any of this because you don't know what to expect. And all this
Yeah.
stuff comes in. And plus, on top of that, you've now got a little baby to deal with as well. So, yeah, it's a journey that I think every parent having gone through it can identify with, but it's so hard to relate to someone that really needs to know that, isn't it? That's the challenge,
Mhm.
like how to make that sense of urgency to someone. So that's, I imagine, the key thing, as you're saying, when we normalize the conversation, talk more about it, and part of what you do on the reentry room is talking about that, planning that reentry, right? Isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say a lot of the moms that I work with or that buy some of the maternity leave plans and resources, most of them, I think, are actually second or subsequent time moms because they struggled so much the first time, don't want to have that same situation again. And so they're like, I'm going to plan better. And they're now looking for those resources. Whereas just a lot of moms, they just don't know what they don't know. And I'm screaming into the void, like, plan for maternity leave. And they think, I mean, and they just think like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go have a baby and take off and then go back to work." And there's
Yeah.
just this lack of talking about it. So yeah, I'm sometimes screaming into the void, but I will say a lot of moms are more aware that it's a problem after going through it. And hindsight's always 2020,
Of
unfortunately.
course. Yeah, yeah. So where do we begin with this conversation? We're talking and we're raising awareness that the need to plan. We've got lived experience that we can talk forever and a day about the challenges of doing this. Going from 0 to 1, the big challenge being we don't know what we don't know, and you don't know what
Mhm.
kind of birth you're going to have. You don't know what kind of parent you're going to turn out to be. You don't know what your partner's going to be like. So how do you? Someone presents themselves to you, and I want to work with Alexa, and we chat. Where would you begin with that person to help them prepare? What are some of the good foundations or practices to think about if I did say I want to start doing things the right way the first time round, not having to learn through the hard mistakes? Where would you begin?
Yeah. So I would begin with talking about what kind of maternity leave you want to have. And that's a question that surprises people because they didn't know they had an option for it at all.
Yeah.
And you can decide if you want to be engaged with your company and your team, get updates weekly, biweekly, monthly. You can be CC'd on emails or be taken off everything in project updates. You can get Slack messages. Like it's very open and negotiable. You're not being written off. Everything is just about planning for that. And especially if you have a longer maternity leave, like in some countries, as opposed to the US, where maybe you get 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, it can look very different. And so that planning ahead is important, but then also upfront planning how you want to return. So talking with your manager upfront about, I would like to come back at part time, or I would like to work remote for the first month back, or hybrid for the first few weeks back with 2 days at home, or whatever it is. Or I need to be able to drop my baby off in the morning at daycare, so I need to push my start time to 9:30 or whatever it is. Like having thought through that return is really important because you can't go back. Once you start
Oh.
returning, once you go back to work and you're struggling and you're like, this is like too much to handle. It's much harder to, while you're so newly postpartum,
Mm.
now have those conversations. And so if you can just plan a little bit ahead of time while you're still pregnant, before you go on maternity leave, plan what you want that maternity leave to look like, the communication, and what exactly you want the first, let's say, few weeks to look like. That makes a huge difference in how you go
Mm.
back to work and the support that you have and the structure so that you don't quickly burn out trying to be at 100% on day one. And now you're also dealing with the first time you drop off your baby at daycare or you're away from him. And now you have to pump instead of breastfeed. And there's so much going on. So it's really just about setting yourself up for a little bit of success early.
It's crazy. It's such a simple yet powerful question that you never ask.
Yeah.
What when you say that, like, what kind of maternity leave do you want, or what kind of return to work do you want? That never ever occurred to us to ask that. You just see that
Hmm.
as something you do,
Yeah.
and you'll figure it out, and you approach that together, or you go through it. But
Hmm.
never one to really intentionally sit down. And I think the key thing here is one, intentional planning, right? And making that and seeing that as a choice, as you said. Now, obviously, there's going to be, and we'll talk about this, there'll be resistance to those. There'll be, it might change over time. You might not have the most accommodating workforce, but in the first instance, it's having the foundation to say, this is what I do want. Now, how you get what you want is the next chapter, right? But in the first instance, having an idea of what you do want, which I imagine most of us don't actually do. Um, and do you see, like, when we talk about the kind of maternity leave that you want? Now, obviously, as you said, this is going to be a very individual uh, answer. But do you see certain types of archetypes that within the people that you speak to that are just helpful to maybe give people a reference point to 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 look at? Like, the are you going back full time versus part time? Or I'm sure there's more within that. But is it helpful to explore the different types of maternity leave that people might choose to take? Or the types of you've referenced already the level of communications and cover. I want to help us to kind of explore a bit more of that, so people can be like, "Oh yeah, that sounds like what I want," or maybe less this and more this. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it comes down to I will say a lot of the highly ambitious women, they want to be more involved. They are on a career path. They are, maybe they're looking for a promotion next year, next quarter, whatever it is. And so they want to be more involved. They want to go back full time pretty quickly and make that transition back to work really sustainable because they would
Mm.
hate to try to go back and then burn out too quickly because they didn't do it right and they got no support, weren't comfortable communicating what they needed, or, just misassumptions from their manager, right? And so a lot of the women I work with are wanting that to be smooth so they don't stumble and fall and end up in one of the statistics about the 40% of women who leave the career after having a baby, right? And
40%.
so, mhm,
Wow.
yeah. And so a lot of the women want to make it work. They want that help with navigating that transition. And so I think it just comes down to not every company will let you go back part-time. Not every company will let you go back hybrid. It's very dependent on the company you're at, sometimes dependent on the manager that you have, but all of it's always going to be a no if you don't ask.
Yeah.
And that comes down to the confidence to speak up and advocate for what you need and really demonstrate the value of I need to go back part time for the first few weeks just to navigate the daycare drop offs and XYZ um, complexities. And so it's all about just that upfront communication. And it's kind of the self advocacy part of this, I will say, is you need to speak up for what you want.
Yes. And the self advocacy piece has come up before in other conversations we've had with so many women. Um, you know, beginning when you're pregnant or even before that, and how
Hmm.
to advocate for the care that you're after. Where you feel sometimes maybe your symptoms aren't being listened to, or maybe you yourself downplay the problems that you think you're experiencing
Hmm.
because you're so used to being like, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay. And
Yeah.
so it is learning, and I guess part of it is a lived experience where you don't know what your tolerance level is because, again, you've never been through this. So
Hmm.
again, for those people that are the highly ambitious careers, uh, you know, really going for it, it's we don't know what we can tolerate, and maybe you there's an element where you have to look at you don't want to have to crash and burn, but at least that tells you what your reference point is, and you don't know how far you can go. And part of the challenge is, yeah, you don't want to be met with a hard red line where you crash out and then realize you have to come back from it. You want to kind of foresee
Yeah.
ahead, and that's always the delicate balance, knowing when to call things and that actually this is my limit now, because you can always push a bit extra, right? I mean,
Mhm.
moms can always push that extra into that extra gear
Yep.
until they can't, and it's trying to pause and slow down before you get to that point.
Yeah.
So it's trying to hopefully learn from others and not get to that point as you can. So where would you begin with people that are struggling with, they might not have the most receptive workplace, or they might perceive that to be the case, whether that is real or not. They've struggled to advocate for themselves in the past. They do feel overwhelmed with it. Where do you begin to build someone's confidence and feeling of control that I
Mhm.
can start to um, not be more in control of what happens with me and with work? Where
Mhm.
would you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is practice. Practice having those conversations. That's part of the work I do with moms, with my coaching is literally just practicing saying what you need, because it can be really nerve-wracking, especially when you're hormonal and emotional and postpartum and sleep deprived and you don't have the words to say, "I need
Mm,
flexibility, I am overwhelmed. Can we scale back this project? Can I delegate this to someone else?" And so it's just practicing that so you get more confidence. The more you practice it, the more comfortable you will get with saying it in real time to your manager. So I always find a partner, friend, colleague, whoever, and just practice what you need to say. Write it out, speak it. And then the second thing I would say is, at the end of the day, it comes down to what you need, and
mm,
that has to be the most important thing. Not what's best for the company, but what's best for you and your baby is going to be the most sustainable path for you going forwards. But I would position it whenever you're going to request something, like let's say going back part time or needing support, position it as, this not only benefits me, but is an advantage to the team because XYZ, because it allows me to be at 100% and give my all at the work I'm doing, if I'm working from home or whatever. And so that you're positioning it as a win win, not I'm asking for accommodations for a special circumstance, but this helps my team do the best work if I can do XYZ for a temporary period. And you can also always say, can we do a 30-day trial of this?
mm,
Can we do a 2-week trial period of me working from home and demonstrating XYZ, or I'll provide XYZ um, task updates or whatever it is. And so there's always options to really
yeah.
try to make it work and demonstrate that you can.
Yeah. It occurs to me as you speak, Alexa, that what I relate this to is, we were taught sales and negotiation, right? And
Mhm.
how important communication is and framing whatever it is you're selling, right? As
Yeah.
what is the value and the benefit to the person you're selling it to? What are their needs? What are your needs? How do we both work together on this? And so if you reframe that as like, this is actually a sales, uh, skill set, or like basically how do you proposition in that way, as you're saying, like how do
Mhm.
we benefit each other? So it's not just about you're not giving me what I want or I'm taking what I need at your expense. Is how do we work together so that we both benefit? And the practice, as you said, like same thing. I'm rating to things that I can relate to, right? And when I've had to, I went back flexi time for a time, and then it was, how does this benefit all of us? I get
Mhm.
what we need and that sense of fulfillment that we get while still delivering on whatever it is I need to provide you with as the workforce. I think that's just a really, clear way to think about things, and that's probably again the role that you play. So that's really helpful. And I think coming back to this idea of the 0 to 1, how do you see, how was it different, for you going from that? And we'll talk a bit more in the next conversation about the 1 to 2. But what was if you step back and think about your 0 to 1 journey, what was the biggest thing that stood out to you, Alexa, in that? And again, and what helped you return well to work?
Biggest thing about 0 to 1 is how much easier it is than 1 to 2.
Won't feel like that. Won't feel like that,
I
right?
know. I know. Um, Looking back, it's definitely like, whew, can't believe I thought that was hard.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I think, you know, there's so much that changes when you become a mother in that instant, and then it sets in even more. And I think you start to notice maybe some ambition shifts and identity shifts into motherhood. And um, you start to question things, maybe like, what are you actually passionate about? Or is this job and career worth it to me anymore? Do I want to leave my baby? And so you may start having these questions with your first kid, just maybe thinking about them in the back of your mind. And that was certainly the experience for me. Is it wasn't like an immediate I must quit my job. It was just
Mm,
little thoughts every now and then of like, huh, this career that I once was extremely passionate about, I don't know anymore. I don't know if I like leaving my kid. I don't know want to if I want to do this anymore, if it's as meaningful to me. Not everyone's the same, everyone's different. Some women have that shift, some don't, and they're even more ambitious in the career that they are in because now they are like it every moment that I'm away from my kid has to matter more. And so
yes.
maybe they love their job even more and they want to
Mm,
bring home
mm,
more money and support their family. Um,
interesting.
but I think with 0 to 1, there is a noticeable shift in that. And then by 1 to 2, it's like, all right, now something's really got to change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, you get to the peak of what you think you can manage, and again,
Yeah.
it's still within the realms of your somewhat your control. Um, Although, again, you're always going to be hard pushed to tell someone that actually you guys got it easy. You know, the 0 to 1, you
Yeah.
guys are fine. It's only until it's like levels of the game, right? You get to level 1, that's hard. Then the level 2 is like, oh, this is really hard, and then you're like,
Yeah.
almost from there. Don't know if it ever gets easy, but it's its own challenge in its own way, and the hardest
Mhm.
thing ever come across is the hardest thing you've ever come across, right? So you don't know what that is until you meet those new challenges. So
Mhm.
I think some really helpful, just I guess stories to share as you've been through. But that's what I think we'll go into the next conversation around. So hopefully this is a useful, just a quick discussion. I think there's plenty more there, Alexa, but just talking a bit
Mhm.
about the journey from 0 to 1, and we'll share in the next conversation what that's been like for you from 1 to 2, and also a bit more about where people can find out more about all the great work you guys are doing. And so we'll stay tuned for that conversation.